Hello and welcome into the Coach on the Couch podcast with your hosts, Martin Fleming and Stephen Alexander Simmons. This fortnightly podcast covers various topics relating to subjects from career and work, health, nutrition and well-being to parenting, relationships, and much more. Each episode will deal with a particular area of these. So, if you are interested in learning and hearing some different thoughts, ideas, and even get some tips or helpful suggestions on these areas of life, or perhaps you are into self-development, then we hope you will stay with us and hopefully enjoy a fun, insightful, and what we hope will be an interesting discussion for you.
Welcome back to another episode of Coach on the Couch, and in this episode we'll be discussing the topic of communication. So I hope to be maybe covering things like the need for clear communication, different types of communication, and much more depending on the direction the conversation goes, as this can be quite a wide and varied subject. And with that being said, let's get straight into it.
Welcome back, and today as my co-host I've got Edward Bates. Everyone would know you from the Christmas edition, I think it was.
Yes, that's right. Nice to be back with you all. How are you all? Hope everybody's doing well.
So today I thought we'd talk about kind of communication. So what's your, I suppose I've got a few questions in mind, but in terms of communication, then how important would kind of communication be for you, Ed? And kind of in terms of, I suppose, I always talk about clear communication. So and what I suppose if I was talking about clear communication, what would that be for you?
Well, that's a very good question. But for me, clear communication, it's nothing complicated. It's just really very simple. So I would say if I was going to give somebody clear communication, you tell them what they need to know. You don't overcomplicate it, but you make sure that all the important information is there, whether that's in a spoken or a written format. I think it's very important. Communication is massively important for all our everyday lives. I'm sure we're going to think about some of the examples today, but when I think about, for example, in terms of work, for example, to start with, you want to be able to have good communication with your team, with your managers, with directors, whoever you're working with, because if not, then things are going to be missed, aren't they? And for people who are in business, if things are communicated wrong, it could be the difference between making a loss or making a profit, really, if we're really going to the bottom line. But for me, in terms of work, that's how I would definitely see it.
So work, what you mentioned work and business, and you said about the various people. You didn't mention, which I think is key for in most situations, the service users and customers.
Well, actually, that's a very good point.
So it's I think it's really important that you have kind of good and clear communication when you're dealing with other people that are kind of coming into either an organization or a business, or whether they're customers, clients, whatever kind of category they're considered. And they could be, or you might have a big organization where you have what they call internal customers as well. So you might have different departments have to deal with each other, and you're kind of cross communicating between different parts of an organization and that kind of thing. So I think, for me, that they're very important, because especially when you look at say typical, maybe if you look at retail business, you wouldn't have a business unless it was the customer. So if you don't make things clear to them, then there's a lot of problems, and obviously your reputation as a business can hinge on all of that. So for me, I think I agree with you in terms of what you've said about the clear communication. For me, I feel it's sometimes, when you're looking at clear communication, it's also about kind of when people, you just need to know what it is you want to know, instead of loads of extra detail with it, if you know what I mean. Sometimes people kind of go off on tangents and start going into loads of other stuff, and it's like you're there waiting for the actual main information that you asked for. And I find that quite frustrating sometimes. So
how would you prefer your communication, Martin? So I'm thinking about, in terms of anything, like, do you prefer it spoken or written communication? What to you is your...
I think that really depends on situations for me. I do like verbal and conversation, that kind of thing, spoken communication. But obviously, if you're dealing with situations within a business sense or a work environment and that kind of a thing, then written communication would be kind of the best thing, because you need a record of stuff, and you're not always going to have that if it's written. And then if it's spoken, not written, if it's spoken, then you don't always have a record of stuff, and things can also be misinterpreted or misunderstood. So then it's important, if you've got written communication in those situations, that you've got a record of and actually it being written down in whatever, if you've got steps or instructions. That's what I'm thinking of, it kind of directions or directive type of information. Other than that, I don't know, communication, what else do I prefer? I use all sorts of, obviously we use all sorts of different methods of communication. I suppose they do all, at the end of the day, strangely enough, whether you look at all the different communication platforms or methods, such as texting or using things like WhatsApp or email, or they all end up being either written or verbal, if you think about it.
Yes.
Apart from maybe video, where you can also show the non-verbal communication, body language, facial expressions, all those sort of things. So, but although you have the different technology platforms, the fundamentals are still end up being those kind of basic elements of communication. However, I think written communication can be kind of quite interesting at times, because some of the technologies have raised these various types of written communication. So you look at, when we first got text messaging before social media came around, there was all this text speak and how that the way you wrote that was very well. I found it very odd, but a lot of kind of letters were dropped, or they'd use for things like your would be you are, and things like that. So and now obviously within the written kind of communication, we also then have all these emojis and smileys and all those sort of things, and now obviously they're getting into memes and stuff. So yeah, so I think it, things have kind of, it can, especially if you're not familiar with stuff. It's like again, even vocabulary has developed, with different things. It's like as you get older, you I'm finding this anyway. As I get older, I'm not quite I'm not quite in with it, because there's all these phrases that youngsters use and all these like specific things. And I don't know if you've heard of a very popular thing just recently called roadman.
Yes, I have heard of this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And some of those words that, the phrases and words that they use and not what typically the meaning, what the normal meanings are. So it's like learning a completely different language almost. And it's really strange. So similarly, like with the whole, when emojis come, even with that, even these days, there's some emojis, right, that were developed that people misuse because they don't realize what they were. So there's one that's like it's to do with someone with their hands together, right? Now, people use that when they a lot of the time people use that when they're talking about kind of, they'll say, "Oh, I'm praying for you," and they'll do this emoji with their hands together, right?
Yes.
Now, the actual original meaning of that was it was meant to represent a high five.
Oh, so again, you see, with a communication, people have totally taken that to mean something completely different.
Yeah.
You see, when you started talking about this, I assumed it was going to be about praying for people before you'd even said it. But when it comes to, that's totally different, isn't it? Again, so that makes me think completely differently about it. But you know what I was thinking, Martin? We're talking about you've spoken about how you like to be communicated to. What about when you're communicating something to someone else? Because that's very different. Because of the way the world is, sometimes you might communicate something to another person that you might think is quite straightforward. And they might take it to mean something totally different. I'm not meaning anything stupid, or just a simple everyday situation, for example. For example, like that emoji you've just explained. So when you're communicating something to people, somebody else, do you kind of think, right, well, if I communicate it in this way, how I'd like it, they would understand it? Or do you try and make it, how do you do it, basically? Because we've talked a lot about how we like to be communicated to people, but what about when we communicate with somebody else? You've got to make sure that is right as well.
But that's where we come back to clear communication. And as like in terms of the work that I do, so as a coach, it's very important to have that clarity. So if I'm dealing with a client and I don't want to misunderstand something, then I always have to ask for clarity, because that's very important, that because otherwise we'd go off on tangents, or I'll be thinking we're working on one thing and it's actually not what is. So I think that's, as I say, that's where clarity of communication comes in, and knowing kind of how to maybe break things down. The other thing that a lot of people don't always realize is that there's different types of people, and you should try and observe and work out what kind of person it is, because that's what will make the communication better. So what I mean by that is that we have visual people, we have audible or audio or whatever.
Audio, auditory,
but audio. Yeah, I don't know. Audible people anyway, and we have people who are kind of very kinesthetic people, very feeling people. So, and it comes down to, in terms of clarity of communication, people won't necessarily understand what you're talking about if you use, that could be a simple phrase, but it may not be the way they filter communication. So a simple example would be when people go, "You see what I mean?" Now, if you say to a kinesthetic person or an audible person, "Do you see what I mean?" it won't mean anything to them, because that's a phrase that would connect with someone who's visual.
Yeah.
Right. So if you said to a visual person, I feel that you're doing so and so, or not, rather than say, I see you're doing whatever, like that's feeling. They don't understand, so they don't filter it in the same way. So it's not that they understand the words, but it doesn't get processed in the same way, and they won't take it in the same way. And it's something that they as a coach, you get taught all of that kind of style, all those sort of styles, and it's very, very much a thing with relation to what they call NLP as well, neuro linguistic programming, which is all about how you say things and how that makes people feel when you say. So it's all about it's the phrases that you use are very important, and making sure that so just by listening to someone and how they talk, you'll get a sense of, are they more a visual person? Are they more a feeling person? Are they more because it'll be the particular ways that they express things or whatever. So that I think that's kind of, and it's obviously not something that most people understand or know about, but it's that can make a big difference, because then you're putting yourself in their position, or that on that kind of level ground, and that way then communication can is a lot more easier.
So can you talk a bit more about this, Martin, before we move on? Because I'm quite interested by something you've just said, actually. Mm-hmm. Now, as for all the listeners, I'm not a coach, right? I'm just a guest, and I'm helping Martin with this podcast. I've done a variety of different things. I've spoken to many people. I've worked in different places, but I've not been a coach. So imagine, Martin, I come to you for some support and some guidance and some discussion. I mean, for you personally, we're not talking about anybody else in this podcast. You've just said that you'll listen to what I say. But people who want to apply to you, for example, how do you find out about them? Because obviously you must need to know a little bit about what they're coming to talk to you about, first of all. And then when they actually start the conversation with you on that first session, it must be really hard to plan like future sessions until you've met that person. So how would you say, for example, to make sure that communication is slick and cohesive between the pair of you, how would you make those first two sessions work, for example?
So your first, your first, when you get someone comes to you, your first session is all about what they expect from coaching. So expectations from a session, or what they're thinking coaching's all about. If they've had coaching or mentoring before, then they'll understand the kind of process and what it is. If they haven't, then it's making sure they understand the difference between that and because you sometimes get people that think it's the same as counselling, and it's completely different. So you'll go through that, find out the expectations. You'll find out what they're why. Well, they've usually told you why they come when they contact you or whatever. They usually say what they're kind of wanting to work on, which can change either as well when you get started. Then so you go through that. You get background from them about kind of what it is that they're looking for, and so in terms of going back to the communication types and stuff, I mean, that's just a question again. It's back to listening, just listening and being aware of the kind of way they phrase and they say things. So other things relating to communication that you use as a coach and that puts people at ease is what they call mirroring and reflecting, and then you can paraphrase, and the big skill, which is the whole listening skill. So although we've told, up and for most of it up until now, we've talked about kind of more communication as in doing ourselves, but the other side of communication is the whole receiving that. Well, I mean, we touched on that when I say about kind of interpreting things and whatever, but listening is actually a communication skill. So, and there's 3 levels of listening. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but so you've got the very, very superficial level, which is kind of if you're in a busy pub, say for example, and you can hardly hear each other and all that, and you get little bits here and there, and so then when you respond, you're kind of you don't really know what it's about, but you get an idea. So it's like it's all superficial kind of communication, because you might just be going, oh yeah, but you don't really, and you probably won't remember later on what the hell you talked about or whatever. There's that. There's an extra level then layer on that, which is where you're listening, but you're at the same time you're kind of thinking more about what you want to say, how you want to respond. And so with some of that, although you're having a proper kind of conversation, you're still not fully present to what that person's saying, because you're already thinking about how you're going to respond to that. So which I get this sense that you're probably sat there going, oh I better listen, I mustn't think about how to respond.
I actually am thinking about that right now.
So then the level that a coach would work at, and similarly a counselor and stuff, is what they call active listening. So it's where you're really right there with the person, and you're listening to what they're saying. So as well as it's not just that physical listening and hearing what they're saying, like audibly what they're saying. It's all about getting that sense of what they're saying. So you can pick up on, well, they might say that, but you can tell they don't really mean that, or they're not convinced of what they're saying themselves. So it's all about you're also aware of intonation, kind of emphasis. You're aware of if you've got a client in front of you, aware of body positioning and all of that sort of stuff. But you're not thinking about what to say next or whatever. You're listening to what they've got to say before you ever go and respond. Because so when there's you can respond once there's a good enough gap, or it seems to be obvious that it's you're able to do that, then you can. You have to be careful as well. There's a thing about kind of being careful, just because the person who comes to you, a client or whatever, if they're talking, they go quiet, that it's okay for you to talk, because they might just be taking a moment to think about what else they want to say. So there is all of that as well, but it's all about proper. That's really deep. The third level of listening is all about kind of deeper listening, and actually having that awareness of how someone's feeling as well with it, and that kind of stuff. So it's a fascinating kind of thing really, and most people don't really they don't really think about it. And majority of people work at either level 1 or level 2.
Do you know what I'm thinking, don't you, Martin?
No, I haven't quite got that level of communication. I'm not telepathic.
Well,
so, which is a complete new communication method, which we'll have to wait and evolve a bit more. But
well, I'll tell you what I'm thinking, if you like, and you can respond whether you agree or disagree. I don't know whether I agree or disagree with what I'm about to say, but I just like to put this out there, and it goes back to the communication side of things, right? So, 2 questions for you to think about. Firstly, you've just explained about being a coach. Now, I myself am an auditory learner. I think it's fair to say. I've always been somebody who's listening.
That was the word, you see. I couldn't think of auditory. That was.
So I would say that I'm an auditory learner before anybody works things out about me. But I would say 2 questions to you. They're both on slightly different topics. Firstly, if we're talking about being a coach, if you are, say, a visual learner or a kinesthetic learner, does it limit you a bit? Because there might be some really good visual learners out there and really good kinesthetic learners who might want to be a coach. But they maybe, I wouldn't like to say they don't possess those skills, because everybody has to work on those listening skills anyway. Even though I say I'm an auditory learner, I believe I need to learn those 3 different levels. And I have heard about those before, but maybe not in such detail. So would it be harder for, say, somebody who is not an auditory learner to learn counselling, coaching through that? And secondly, going back to the answer about the question about communication, for me, I feel like if we're talking about communication, people are more visual learners. What are your thoughts on that?
So you're saying in general? You think majority of people are visual?
Well, I mean, I've obviously not done a thesis on it, but I feel from what people tell, and I guess I should point out here, but I've never had any sight before. I'm totally blind.
No, I mean, I don't agree. I think yes, okay. It's hard to know what, like you say. I haven't done a study on it either, so it's hard to know what the percentages are. But I wouldn't say that. Well, that in general, everyone is. I know that's not, you're not saying everyone, but in terms of that, I don't know. There might be a majority, but at the same time, I don't agree. I think there's there are the quite a lot of other different types of people out there. As for the other question, no, I again, you can be of any type of person, but if you're gonna do coaching or counselling, the important thing is the whole listening thing and the stuff that goes with that. So it's freeing up your mind and emptying your mind of other stuff, so you're not caught up in your own stuff, you're not caught up in your own thoughts, you're not thinking of how to respond. So if you might be more predominantly a visual person, or more predominantly a kinesthetic person, but the observations you make is probably going to be more influenced by that. So yes, you'll be listening and you're listening to what they're saying, but if you were a visual person, then you'd be very observant of how they're sitting, how they look. Is that person turning away, or do they look like they want to engage or they don't? And what's the facial expressions, and is the facial expressions and body language mirroring what they're actually saying? Or so as a visual person, you'd be kind of very aware of a lot of that stuff, because that would be your forte. That would be the thing that's natural to you. But it doesn't mean you can't do the other stuff. We all have levels of everything in us, but it's what is more dominant. So it's similar to when you do personality profiling and stuff like that, you'll come out with more dominant traits, and you'll be kind of more a particular type of person. But we all have the other traits in us, but it's just what it shows is just when push comes to shove, which aspect is stronger, and what are you going to fall back on. So similarly with that, you might be a certain way, but you're still got those abilities to take on board the other stuff. So and as a kinesthetic person, as someone who would be more a touchy feely type person, not that they're going to come up and hug you or whatever, because you got to respect like personal space and all that, but they're going to be more aware of how does the voice sound. Do they sound like they're convinced of that, or do they sound like they're upset, or that's being it's upsetting them, the thoughts, the memories of such and such a thing, or that they can't do this or that or whatever. They'll have those kind of that kind of intuition and that awareness of it. So it all plays, it all plays strengths on itself, really. I don't think it might be easier for certain types. It might be easier for a kinesthetic and a maybe an auditory type person to or if you've got, definitely if you're a mix of an auditory and a kinesthetic, things like counseling are going to be ideal, because then your visuals still have to come into it, but you're with counseling, you're right there with them in the whole emotional thing, and you're taking them back and you're keeping them in this emotional place for healing and stuff like that. So stuff like that can be, quite, that would be an ideal type of person, but it doesn't mean that no one else can do counseling or whatever.
In terms of you, though, for business coaching, because I'm aware that we're coming off the subject from counselling and coaching, what would you say? You know what I am. What would you say you are? So what kind of, when you're talking to somebody, like as in a business coaching way, we'll talk about that first of all. You're what kind of person would you say you are? Like, you an audio learner? Are you visual? Are you kinesthetic? What would you say you are?
I would probably say I would
find out.
I would probably say I would be auditory. Well, I have to be auditory now anyway. But then my when I had vision, it wasn't loads. So
no.
But
you see, for me, like, this is quite an interesting one. While you answer that, I just wanted to clarify something I said while you think of an answer, right? The reason I'm auditory, yes, it's because I'm blind, right? But for me, I even think, had I had sight, obviously, how can I say I've never had sight before? But if I had sight, I really believe I would have been an auditory learner. For me, I think that's quite clear. I think I've known that for a long time. And I think as Martin is proving there with his uncertainty, because, I think you fit into all three. Well, we all fit into all three. For me, I
think generally we it's not something you automatically think about. So it's just when you're asked it, it's one of those questions you kind of hesitate on. I think I'd probably say predominantly I'm probably a very kinesthetic person, because I'm very much an empath. So and things bother me if it's like if someone gets hurt or that kind of stuff. A lot of that kind of stuff bothers me. So I think because I'm very empathic, I'd say I'm probably more a kinesthetic type person, and then your auditory would filter in there, and then I'd probably have a bit of visual, because I'm able to visualize things due to the limited vision I had. So I'm still the time I have good visual ability is actually building up when I'm trying to learn environments or whatever, and as long as it's, again, we're back to communication, as long as things are communicated clearly to me, and I understand positions of things or where things are around me, I can build up pictures in my head. But I think that's the order my kind of abilities go in. I think I would be more a kinesthetic person. I would use probably more phrases like feeling type phrases as well. Yeah, I don't think I use many. Well, sometimes I'd use things like see and I mean, obviously we all say like watching TV or whatever, but yeah, other phrase. I think I don't know. I haven't really kind of what's the word? I haven't really
analyzed.
Yeah, I haven't really like self-analyze. I haven't really just kind of observed myself enough to kind of to know how much visual type of phrases I use. But I think I use more of the other types of phrases than visual phrases. So yeah, so that well, I that would be kind of what I think anyway.
I think all business coaches would be interested if they saw me. They wouldn't be able to work me out at all.
Why is that?
I'll just get in there before you make that comment, because you know me quite well.
And I think you know, I feel just kind of moving on a little bit from with regards to communication. I think it's in some circles it's made kind of important enough, but I think in general people don't really consider communication. I think they just I feel, you know, especially in everyday life, and I know, you know, obviously, you know, you're not going to sit there and go, oh, well, how am I meant to talk to this person, or how we just do it. But I think sometimes people forget how important clear communication is, but just communicating with others as well.
I think you're dead right here, Martin.
You know, I think because and I think I know there's other aspects come into play here, but I think when you've got, like, for example, if say you want some help doing something, but I don't know, you there's not really anyone. I mean, I've to really give a good example, I've got to go back on the and I know before we started recording, and we've been talking, and we were talking about the podcast before that we spoke about. We didn't want this to go completely about kind of either disability or blindness and stuff, and just because we both got that kind of disability. But the only examples I can think of is like when you're looking for help when you're out, and you might be looking for, trying to find somewhere, but you know it's unfamiliar, so you're trying to solicit kind of help from someone, and people sometimes they'll watch you, and they won't approach you, and they'll just they'll watch you struggling, and they won't come up and ask if you need any help. And I know there's other aspects there, and people say about kind of, well, I wasn't sure, and I'm a bit, you know, I was a bit worried about kind of what you'd say, or, you know, there's all of those. But in terms of just looking at it from the communication standpoint, I think also that people just don't. I think also with the whole busyness of everything, and people like just are so busy with their own lives, and people just walk by you and they're just like they're in a world of their own, or they're doing their own communication, they're on their phones or whatever. It's and I think people just don't think of other aspects of, you know, in terms of that communication. Yeah, I think, you know, it's just that kind of very superficial level then of communication, because they're not really thinking of what people, what your needs are, or what should they say or shouldn't they say, or whatever. And
I think these are good points. I think these are. I know we said we weren't going to make it all disability related, but why not talk about it for a few minutes? But I understand exactly what you mean. But I guess what I'd say to you is, if we have a boot on the other foot, and I know. Well, I mean, again, I shouldn't say this, but I suspect I would be very bad if I was sighted and I saw somebody who was blind trying to find their way to somewhere. I'd like to sit here and say I'd go over and help, but if I was busy doing other things, firstly, would I go over? And secondly, because there's a good chance I might never have met a blind person, how good would I be? I think if you're blind, like, I don't know if you expect this or not, Martin, and this is something that sometimes my brain thinks about. Sometimes I meet people and I assume that they're going to be really, really good at communicating because I've explained something what I think is relatively well to them, but they might not be able to explain it back to me. And that's just
that's because you're two different people types. So, for example, my son's mum, and this was something that we had, was a struggle with it when we were together, is a very visual person. So her communication is, and her responses are all very facial expressions and kind of body language and all that kind of stuff. And for me, obviously, I need some kind of verbal feedback.
Yeah.
So I'd say something and I wouldn't get anything back.
No.
But I found out, like, it definitely, there was one situation where I said something and it was kind of, she thought it was kind of either nice or funny or whatever it was, and I was informed by someone else then later on that, oh yeah, she smiled at you. I was like, well, that really didn't help, because I was like, I didn't know she smiled at me, and
it's probably worth not even knowing at that point, isn't it?
So that's the problem when we're back to those extremes again of those people. So although I spoke about the terminology and how to know someone, it's also like the barriers then become, we then have, this is where we then come into communication barriers, is that if you've got two different people and neither of them are going to adapt, then there's going to be misunderstanding, misinterpretation.
And that goes back to what I said earlier on about why I think I don't necessarily agree with this, but why I think more people might be more visual learners than the others. There was a thing in the paper. I remember somebody cut it out for me about 5 years ago, which was helpful because I actually couldn't read it. But they asked me to take it home. Now, in this press piece, do you know how much they reckoned was through non-verbal communication?
Not non-verbal, they reckon is about, it's somewhere around about 95% or 90. I think it's 93 or 90, whatever, and it's low to mid 90s, and then they reckon other forms of communication equals the last 7%.
So that's why I said what I said earlier on about the possibility of more people being visual learners. I'm not saying that I necessarily think people are, but I think if people are sighted, and again, I'm not going off on one about here. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't say this, but maybe you can tell me, because you've had a bit of sight in the past. People use their sight more.
I think I understand kind of the stats to some degree, or what you're saying, because for the vast majority, they have vision, right? So that is something that they use every day, and it's not really thought about. So they use that every day anyway. But I think when you're looking at types of communication types, or those types of people that I mentioned, the three kind of types, you'll still get those three types of people. And so even if you've got people who can see, and they can, that's how they live day to day with vision, so that's normal. But you'll still get kinesthetic people, or you'll still get auditory people. So although they're living day to day with that's just the sense they have, and it's something that, in a lot of ways anyway, is taken for granted, right? Because it's the thing that they use every day, all the time, and it takes a while for them to get used to using their other senses. Now, that's kind of verging on the whole kind of more of physiology or kind of biology thing, in terms of senses and stuff. So I understand the whole, well, they're mainly going to be visual, but of course they're going to be visual because they use it all the time. But in terms of what kind of a person they are and how they prefer their communication, it will depend on the type of person they are. So it can become not so clear cut.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that. It's just I always think that if you're sighted, it's probably just easier to give somebody a quick glance or a quick smile or a quick nod and then it's done. But you are right.
Because I think if you look at like, for example, certain types of roles, certain jobs in business. So if you look at marketing or design or something like that, so some of it will be visual, but they've got to speak to a whole audience, and they've got to instill certain things in you to attract you to go and purchase this item, and that usually falls into those areas again. So okay, if it's a radio ad, you're looking at auditory people, you've got to make it attractive auditory to them. So how would you do that with someone who's probably more visual? If you've got a radio ad, you're going to have that background sounds, like, it might be in a garden, or it might be, you've got traffic going by or whatever. You're going to build up that environment that in the normal way they'll be able to see, but you're making it on an auditory level. And then you're on top of that, then you bring in the whole voiceover stuff and the actual ad. And for a kinesthetic person, then they're going to use things that are going to have an emotional reaction, some kind of emotional reaction to, and then obviously the whole auditory thing. If you've got the radio ad would fit with them anyway, no matter what you're putting in there. So and similarly then you've got the TV side of it. TV's predominantly visual, but you've still got to speak. You've still got to bring images into play that are going to speak to those, and sounds and music or whatever that's going to speak to those other people. So if you look at a particular profession like that, they're already aware that there's more than one type of person, and even if you're visual, you're still going to have these other elements to you. So I just wanted to drop that in, because I again, it's not just me saying I don't think it's clear cut. I think you can see that through things like that, brand awareness and marketing and those sort of things. So
I think it's a whole different realm of it. I mean, we've talked about it from the very basic, really, to how important it is and what can happen if it goes wrong as well, and what people prefer. I mean, like, I hadn't even, when we started this session today, I hadn't really thought about all the different types of communication, all the different ways that people receive that information and how they, how they process it, if you like. But I think it is massive. Guy, I feel like there's probably a lot more to talk about this in the future, but I need to go and process that information, what I've just taken in, because I think it is a big thing. And I think people listening, I mean, they'll definitely have their ways about doing this. And I think people who are in big jobs, big powerful jobs, there's so many different things to take into account every single day. You've got to get it right, haven't you, really? And it's making sure that it's accessible and inclusive for everybody. And it's not easy. I'm sure it's not easy.
No, of course it's not. I mean, and like I said before, it's like it's not something that you're, as soon as you go talking to someone, you're going to think, oh, that's that kind of a person or whatever. Yeah, if you've got a bit of awareness, as the conversation goes on, you might become aware, oh yeah, they're using those phrases, and you can start kind of mirroring those phrases back to them. So rather than using, but yeah, you don't automatically know, and that's the thing. You have to kind of judge things as you go. But once you do know how someone is, then obviously it's easier. But yeah, I mean, like you say, within business, you've got you. It's important because you're dealing with, like, especially if you're in senior positions, you're dealing with lots of different employees, and it's good to know kind of the different levels of communication, or different, and the different types of people, so you can kind of adapt your style of kind of dealing with them, and that kind of thing. So if it becomes apparent that someone doesn't really understand what you're saying because it's like in a certain way, you can kind of try and work out what kind of person they are. And if you were trying to explain something and you were doing it from a more, I don't know, say like a more feeling type of approach, but they're a visual person, then you'd kind of then go, oh, maybe I need to show them. So maybe I need to draw something, or maybe I need to, I don't know, write it down, or, it'll be something that would, like, so that you can adapt and change that. Yeah. I mean, in terms of misunderstandings, with communication, again, is that the old game of Chinese whispers. That's a classic. That's a classic of communication breakdown.
Yeah.
Because it depends on if people have heard you right, and then you're passing it on to someone else, and that person, again, this is where you see the whole, how someone interprets something or processes it, because then they pass it. If you've got these different people passing stuff on, and then it's usually kind of what, by the time it gets to the end, it's like completely different. Yeah, so yeah, and I mean, you look at I'm just trying to think of examples that in history, past examples where they used to have to do that, where they used to have to pass messages back down the line. It had to be so clear and concise, because otherwise, it would just get kind of mixed up, and by the time you get the other end, it just wouldn't make sense. So yeah.
That's a whole different subject, though, because again, if people interpret that, they can go away, and some people can add little bits to it. So they try, and if they don't have the full story, which they give them, they then add something to it, and that can have huge ramifications. I can think of a situation where somebody died who I knew quite well, and people were saying it was a whole different reason as to why he died by the end of it. It was nothing like that at all. It was just no foul play, nothing like that at all. But because of what one individual thought, somehow something had been put in the paper. It wasn't in Norfolk. It was somebody who I knew a long way away, and it went in their local press, and it caused real distress for the family. So you're right in what you say. Like, it's got to be passed on correctly, but it's, if somebody doesn't hear all that information, it can go seriously wrong, because if they try and add another bit to make it helpful for the next person to make the full story, they might add the wrong bit of information, and then that causes all sorts of different confusing messages. So it has got to be done right from the beginning.
So do you think there's particular situations where communication is more important than others, or what would be your thoughts? Or do you think it's just important, full stop? I'm thinking of, there's work and business, there's relationships, there's friendships, there's working with, doing things with children, which, again, could mean that you have a different level of communication again. teenagers. I'm just thinking in, different types of environments and situations.
Yeah, I think it's important at all times, as we've explained. But I think you're right to say, how important is it all the time? I mean, because you don't, depending on what the situation is, you might have to give an awful lot of communication, and you could bombard somebody. So, for example, a young child or a teenager or somebody who's not clear on a situation. And my thought process to that is, how far do you go? How far do you go about communication? Because it's not always clear cut, and it's not always easy to explain. But if you miss something out, you could miss a key detail out in all of those situations that you've just mentioned. By the way, I'm trying to answer on all of them.
Yeah.
In my non-coaching mind, I would say that communication is key, but it's I think it goes down to how you feel in that situation, up to the communication that you give that other person or that group of people. And it might go wrong. It might go wrong if you don't give them the right information or the right communication. But you might be doing it to keep the situation simple. And sometimes simple isn't always a good idea. That's a really hard one to answer. I mean, what do you think?
Well, with children, you have to keep it simple. So with young children, it has to be very simple, because you're dealing with the understanding level. So it's like, how much are they going to understand? And so it has to be kind of simple. Teenagers, I think you need to know the jargon. I think you have to know roadman.
You can't beat that jargon.
Because if you don't know the jargon, you ain't got a hope.
No, exactly.
So, yeah. Well, in some cases, anyway. I mean, yeah. I think just picking one particular thing, like that I threw out there. I think, I mean, definitely in, say, relationships, I think it's absolutely key.
Yes.
In my view, it's the foundation of the relationship. Yeah, there's other things that are important, trust and openness, honesty, but that's all well and good if and that's all able to be interpreted and understood okay if you've got good communication. And that's where I come back to the whole clarity of communication between two people. You've got to have that clarity of communication, because your relationship will just break down no matter what it's over, whether it's, this person doesn't meet my needs or whatever. It's okay, but have you explained to them what that need is, or how that need is interpreted by how you see that need. So for example, in romantic relationships, for example, a lot of us will have one of the things you'll want is, like, you want to feel loved, or you'll want to feel appreciated, or that kind of thing. Now, for two individuals, that could manifest itself in different ways. So for one person, it might be, showing appreciation might be that they get flowers every week or whatever. But then to the other party in the relationship, that may not be the case. They might think of it as something else. If they're not thinking of the other person, they're just going by how they are, then the way they might feel appreciated is by someone just acknowledging what they're doing, or something like that, or going out for a meal, or something very different. So then if you don't communicate that between the two of you, then that's where it all then starts to break down. And it's them being able to take on board how that is for each other, so that you can transaction those things. So you can, that sounds very businesslike, but so for example, if you then know that person feels appreciated by you going and buying flowers every week, then that's what you do, because you know that's going to make the difference, even though it means nothing to you. It's what is it, and if that person's important to you, that's what you do, because that's how, but you can't do that unless you know. So, and that's why I say I think communication is one of the, and probably for me the one of the main fundamental building blocks of a kind of romantic or intimate relationship or whatever. You could argue that's the same for friendships and stuff, but it wouldn't be so it wouldn't be the same level, because you're not living with each other, you're not sharing your lives together, whatever. But definitely within a romantic relationship, I think communication's a big thing, very, very big thing. And I think it's also, and in my experience, it's usually the main thing that, despite or as I say, people will say about various reasons why it's broken down, say, for example, or why they're having problems. But when you dig right down to it, it ends up being usually it's down to poor communication.
I completely agree with that. I completely agree with that as well. But I think also another thing to look at in that situation is when a situation like that goes wrong, you've got to be able to, when I say communicate with yourself, I mean, you've got to internalize that. So you've got to look at yourself as well and think, right, well, that went wrong because of what the situation was. And mainly, as you say, it's down to communication. And then it's learning from those mistakes as well. So when I say communicating with yourself, I don't mean sitting there. If you're a visual learner, writing, well, it might be writing yourself a letter if you're a visual learner. Yes, it might be. It might be recording something if you're an auditory learner. It could be anything like that. But I think it's important to learn from that. As communication is one of those things which is really great if it works with yourself and other people. But I think also you do have to have those check-ins with yourself. How is it feeling? Am I doing all I should be doing? Am I coming across the right way? So I think what you've just said in a particular situation of a relationship, we all want it to go well, don't we?
But how do you know if it's coming across the right way, unless you've found out from the other person?
Well, yeah, if it's not coming across well from them, you need to take that away. I don't mean you personally, but
because unless you find out what kind of a person they are, or you become aware of what kind of a person they are, or how things are for them, then you don't know how you can't tell whether things are coming across the right way, because you might think you're doing it right, but unless you're properly interacting and communicating and finding out from the other person what they need, or what how things are for them, it's very difficult to be able to do that. So we're back to that whole interaction, that whole understanding the needs, and the whole understanding the communication styles. The other thing is to, with the communication, you see, if something breaks down, is also to, I mean, you say about talking to yourself, but or communicating with yourself. What I kind of thought of there when you were saying that was in terms of owning stuff. You have to. So when you're in a couple, when you're a partnership, you've got to own your side of whatever's happened.
Absolutely.
If you're not willing to do that, and you start kind of blaming each other, then that's, communication is going to break down anyway, then, because you just don't have it, because you won't be listening to each other. It's the same as when they talk about disagreements or arguments. An argument is a disagreement where you don't listen to each other.
Yes, so, it is. Yeah.
So you can disagree, but if you are listening to each other and trying to understand the other person, then you can still disagree, but it's understanding and appreciating their side of things. Where an argument is just purely, again, we're back to those levels of listening. It's so with an argument, you're just interested in what you've got to say, and you think you're right. So it's, you know, it's that kind of thing. So with the communication in a relationship is all about ownership as well. And there's a lot of cases where people don't do that, especially if something's broken down. You go through the phase when it's just fresh is all about, you know, you feel a bit bitter, and this person did this to me, and this is what they were like, and and stuff like that. So
look at yourself as well, then.
So, you know, but yeah, so that's kind of when you were saying about self-communication, that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. No, I mean, I wasn't sure if that was the right terminology to use, but as we were talking about it today, I thought I'd try and bring it into the sentence.
So yeah, I think we could go all night about this. So I think, you know, we better let the listeners go and process everything they've listened to.
I hope you found it useful and interesting.
I hope they can take something from it, and some of the ideas and thoughts from it. I'll be back with another episode in another couple of weeks, hopefully. So all going well, and we'll hope to have you on the podcast again soon, Ed.
Looking forward to it. In the meantime, though, stay safe and speak to you all soon.
So bye for now.
Bye for now.
Welcome back, and in this episode it was all about communication, different communication styles, types of people that receive the communication in various ways. We had a very interesting discussion around all of that, and the different obstacles it can take as well if things are not interpreted right, and the different environments, different situations that communication is very important in, either business and employment, work related stuff, relationships, and, you know, even when you're out and about and trying to get help from someone or those sort of things. We dealt with a lot of various aspects of communication, and it was, you know, I definitely found it interesting speaking to Ed over that and things like that. So with that all being said now, I hope you all enjoyed the episode. It was a bit different, and I will be back with another episode very shortly. Hopefully next time I'll have Steve joining me. I hope you enjoyed that episode and you got something from it, and I look forward to being with you very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the fortnightly Coach on the Couch podcast with your hosts, Martin Fleming and Stephen Alexander Simmons. You can find this podcast on the following platforms: Spotify, Anchor, and Google Podcasts, and more platforms to follow. You can leave comments and feedback directly on the Anchor platform, or you can contact us directly by emailing us at coachonthecouch22@gmail.com. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to being with you soon.